So I think there's at least 4 factors that can help explain why we see so many more women writing in this period. So the first and perhaps most obvious is that there are massive changes happening in print culture in England at this time. So a notable change is the end of the Licensing Acts in 1695. So this basically means that there is no more pre-censorship on texts, which leads to a proliferation of more publishing houses. People are experimenting with different genres and types of writings, and what they learn is that there is a huge appetite for writings by and about women, and women are big consumers and producers of literature. A second factor is changes in the intellectual culture. So this is the 17th century and the end of the 17th century in particular, it's the dawn of modern science. So people are pushing back against old scholastic ways of thinking, where you learned in schools. You had to learn Latin, and knowledge was established by interpreting ancient and scriptural authorities. So a big thinker in this revolution is Descartes in France. For Descartes, we don't learn by studying ancient texts, but rather by turning inward. He says that we have to cast off all our prejudices through this method of radical doubt, and then we can establish knowledge based on what we know inside. So this sort of individualistic account of knowledge gets rid of the need for Latin, the need for going to schools, and it's something that women can do by themselves in their own rooms. John Locke in England offers a certain, another epistemology like this. For Locke, we're all born blank slates, so there aren't ideas which men have that they're born with that women don't, or capacities men have that women don't. And we learn through sense experience. And so women begin to say, okay, well then we can learn as well. We also have sense perception, and we can also establish knowledge through our senses and through our reason. So for this reason, the monopoly that the schools have and universities have on learning is sort of broken in this period, and it's something that the lay people and women have access to. So a third factor is that there is a lot of political changes happening in this time, which is making it more possible for women to intervene in political debates. So after the 1660s, with the restoration of the monarchy, we have a loosening of Puritanican morals and the Puritanican culture. So there's a return of theater, salons, coffee houses, these semi-public spaces in which women can begin to participate as both political and just cultural and literary actors. Also with the 1688 exclusion crisis and the Glorious Revolution, you see the dawn of a party system, the Whigs and the Tories. And the party system actually creates these informal mechanisms for people who are excluded from regular channels of political power. A woman can't be an MP, but she can participate in a party. And this polarization of politics also allows for women to begin to intervene. So for all of these reasons, I think that by the end of the 1690s and into the 18th century, we see a lot more women participating in political and social life. So there is a broad range of topics that they're interested in, and it's important to note that women don't agree, but they are engaging in similar topics. So some women are interested in moral philosophy, and epistemology. They're interested in establishing that women are capable of learning and of achieving virtue. So they're interested in intervening in these debates with Locke and Descartes and proving that it shows that women are both capable of learning and capable of reason, and from that also capable of virtue. There's also women who are engaging in more political debates and about their own social lives. So you see women begin to engage in debates about the sort of social institutions that structure their lives, and particularly marriage. So women begin to argue, especially by the 1690s, that marriage is a kind of slavery. And they mean different things by this, but it's a way of critiquing the kind of authority that their husbands apparently have over them. A third kind of debate that you see women entering into is just about partisan politics. So a lot of women are engaging in debates between Whigs and the Tories and who should really be having power and influencing political power at the time. So there are women intervening in debates about the role of commerce in political life, about religious toleration, and just the very questions that are dividing the parties at this time, and women are intervening in those too. Locke, at the end of his life, is living with a woman called Damaris Masham, and they are actually collaborating when she is writing her writings on women's education. She is inspired directly by Locke's own epistemology and his educational writings, and applying them explicitly to women to argue that women should be able to participate in education and public life. You also see writers like Mary Astell. They have collaborations with Cambridge School Platonists like John Norris, and these are largely moralistic writings about the love of God and human beings' capacities for virtue. John Norris and Mary Astell, they had correspondences, and they published the correspondences under both of, well, not under their names, but it was very easy to tell who was writing. Another collaboration might be Judith Drake and her husband, James Drake. So he was an anatomist, a society, or part of the Royal Society, and he actually died before he published his magnum opus, a treatise on anatomy. And Judith Drake actually managed to secure the publication of it and finish the preface for him. So there's ways in which we might speculate that she actually had some role in the broader writing of the anatomy treatise. So I'll mention Judith Drake because I was just talking about her. So she's married to James Drake, a scientist, doctor, and Royal Society fellow, alongside John Locke, Isaac Newton, Boyle. So she writes in 1696 an essay in defense of the female sex, where she defends Lockean epistemology. She says we're all born blank slates. Drawing on her husband's work, she says there's no differences in the bodies of mind and women that are significant to our sense perception. So men and women learn in the same ways. We all have access to the same knowledge, so we're equal. But what is really interesting about her text, I think, is her observations about the socio-political changes that are happening in her society, and her optimism about what she thinks this means for women. So she notes that with the commercial revolution that is happening in this period, there might be opportunities for women to engage in the polite society. Society is no longer based on war and conquest, but trade and commerce, this sort of polite society in which women can access and participate. She also notices the changes in scholastic or in scholarly culture. Women no longer need to learn Latin. They can access translations of books, and so they don't need to go to school to learn anymore. And she also notices the broader public sphere that is accessible to women, coffee houses, salons. She thinks women can have a really important role in civilizing the conversations in these venues, and thinks that women just can't be excluded. So she's a thinker who I think is really embracing the sorts of changes that are happening in her society and sees them as paving the way for more inclusion. It was fairly successful. So there was 4 editions of it, and one was published in the same year, which suggests that it was selling very well, that the publishers wanted to put out a second edition that year. There was also responses, or if not responses, imitators of her. It was a character sketch genre, so through the essay, she goes through character sketches of men, like a scholastic, a scholar who's in the university who doesn't want to interact with women, a coffee house politician who's getting too worked up about politics. And the point of the essay is to show how all of these men can be improved by further interactions with women, by letting women into academic and public spaces. And other people after her began writing more essays like this, more character sketches making fun of men who they thought could benefit from interaction with women. So she started a little bit of a trend, and for that reason we can see that she was somewhat successful. And she's published, or versions of her essay gets republished into about the mid-18th century. So probably the most famous individual at this time is Mary Astell. So she wrote on a variety of topics. She's probably most famous as what is thought of as a Cartesian feminist. So she was an avid reader and fan of Descartes, and she particularly endorsed his educational method, that we need to radically doubt all of our prejudices and build our knowledge upon certain truths that we can discover innate in our minds. So she argued that women can do this, and that actually we should have female academies in which women are trained in this kind of reasoning. So that was a very popular text, and she continued to write on women's issues. She wrote her Reflections on Marriage, which further condemned marriage as an institution that prevented women from fully exercising their reason. And she was also a prolific Tory pamphleteer. Despite these rather radical feminist treatises, she was a deeply conservative political writer. She was skeptical of religious toleration and attempts to tolerate religious dissidents or allow them to hold political power. She was a staunch defender of the Stuart monarchs and their claims to absolute power, and most of her writings are actually political pamphlets aimed at defending this sort of Tory political system. So she was fairly controversial. She was critiqued by someone like Swift. People were really mocking the female academy. She was mocked as a prude, someone who didn't like men. So during the early 1700s, there's a lot of periodicals coming out, and they will often make fun of this Neoplatonic woman, and they are referring to Astell, mocking her for her disdain of marriage and her claims to not be flattered by men. So she was seen as a bit prudish. Well, we don't know much about how her career panned out or why she stopped writing when she did, because she stops writing in about 1709, besides a preface for another woman's travel writings. So it could be that the ridicule, which she often complained about, she complained about people ridiculing her, so it could be that that got her down. It could also be that the Tory ended up not being ascendant. The Whigs ended up having a lot more political power by 1710, and she might have just felt like it was a lost cause. So Margaret Cavendish is another writer. She was a noblewoman who was part of Henrietta Maria's court during the English Civil War. She had to flee to France, where she then married William Cavendish. So this marriage brought her into some intellectual circles. The Cavendish family were patrons of Thomas Hobbes. They also hosted all of the preeminent French intellectuals like Descartes. So Cavendish was present and surrounded by these really great intellectual figures, and often carved out her own very unique voice in this atmosphere. She was, like Hobbes, a materialist. She didn't believe that there was immaterial substances. She was also, like Hobbes, a royalist. She was a staunch defender of the monarchy when it was going through this time of crisis. But she also was keen to differentiate herself from him. And in many ways, I think we can read a lot of her texts which explore the role of women in society as pushing back against the neglect of women in these more canonical figures texts. Aphra Behn is another figure like Astell who is a staunch Tory. She served as a spy for Charles II during the Anglo-Dutch Wars, and a lot of her writings can be seen as allegorical and interventions on the exclusion crisis. She also wanted to defend the rights of the Stuart monarchy and was deeply concerned about the ways the growth of a new commercial culture could unsettle the established hierarchies and the kind of natural order. So she wrote, probably her most famous work is Orinoco, or The Royal Slave. It is a tale about an enslaved African prince who is taken to Suriname, where he unsuccessfully leads a slave rebellion and eventually dies. So it's a very interesting text, because on the one hand, it might seem like a proto-abolitionist text. She's telling this sympathetic tale about the cruelty this Black African is experiencing, as a slave. But it's also a deeply royalist text. Orinoco is a prince, and that is partly why his enslavement is problematic for her. Indeed, part of what she sees as being really wrong with slavery is not the fact that Orinoco, there are people who have power over others, but really the buying and selling and the trading of people. For her, Orinoco could have slaves, and that is completely permissible, but the buying and selling of royalty is what is her concern. I think that these women had a massive influence on how we understood the partisan system and party identities. So as I mentioned, a lot of these women, like Astell, Behn, these are Tories. They are writing at the burgeoning of a party system, and they are defending a particular party. So the women who are coming after them often take up that mantle and continue to write partisan texts and political satires in a way that really shapes party identity as it will emerge. So some thinkers like Delarivier Manley, in 1709, she writes The New Atlantis, which is a political satire making fun of the corruption of Whigs. And similarly, Eliza Haywood, she started as an actress and becomes one of the most prolific writers of the first half of the 18th century in England, and also writes incredible political satires mocking the hypocrisy of Whigs and the corruption of Whigs. So in a lot of ways, these women were shapers of party identity at the time. And so Manley's New Atlantis was a hit seller. She ends up being prosecuted for libel. So it just shows how influential these works were for establishing what the party lines were. So Astell is the central figure. So she, with the Female Academy, she really establishes that for women to be able to learn, they need to be able to look inside themselves. So that means they need to be away from men and the distractions of the real world, because if they're being courted, they are not being able to turn inwards, but they're being concerned with like the outside world. So for Astell, the idea of a female academy is really a central idea for how women are going to become free. And that idea doesn't really get taken up because she is kind of relentlessly mocked for it. But I think other women are at least kind of covertly taking it up. So by Eliza Haywood's later life, she is writing moralistic treatises about conduct for women and conduct for wives, which are advocating this kind of retreat from the world in order to establish their own knowledge. So although someone like Haywood doesn't offer any arguments for institutions for women's education, you see this concern with developing reason through an inward turn and a retreat from the world, and that's going to be the basis of women's education and virtue. By the mid-18th century, there are encyclopedias being written of women writers. So George Ballard's Memoirs of Women of Great Britain, where he goes through and kind of methodically catalogs women who have the capacity for learning. So Astell, Catherine Phillips. He goes through women writers and writes this big catalog of all of these women who have written that people then buy and study. Oh, look, there are women who are writing. Clearly, we have the capacity to learn. Similarly, by the mid-18th century, you have the blue stocking movements. A lot of these women were connected to earlier feminists of the 18th century, and these women are actively arguing for like a network for women's education, for the creation of salons where women can discuss and read and learn. Yeah, so I think the pushback can go kind of two ways. You can get pushback for being a moralist like Astell. So Swift, someone like Steele, Addison, these men who are writing periodicals are really mocking Astell for being a bit prudish, for being a moralist. But then on the other hand, there are women like Aphra Behn, Eliza Haywood, Manley. They're writing political satires that are filled with sexual intrigue. And these women are getting pushed back against for being licentious, for having no moral compass. So I think there isn't one way of pushing back against women. It is these multiple reactions to any kind of woman writer, whether she's a learned woman, as Astell styled herself, or if she's seen as more licentious and bawdy and entertaining. Those women are also pushed back against as immoral. So it seemed like there was no real winning, because no matter which kind of person you styled yourself as, these women were getting pushed back against. Certainly, I think as the 18th century goes on, women's role as writers gets narrower, because after the Restoration, you have a lot of women who are writing plays, who are writing fiction that can have sexual intrigue, and people are really buying and interested in that. And although they're getting pushed back, there is tolerance and an appetite for it. But by the end of 18th century, women's role as writers becomes narrower. They are forced more into the moralist camp. So even other women, like Mary Hayes, she writes a female biography, another encyclopedia full of women writers to emulate. And people like Aphra Behn, she casts away with dispersion, saying this is immoral, women shouldn't act like this. You shouldn't write plays that have sexual innuendos in them. So I think by the 18th century, women have this view of women as civilizing. They are part of making society more polite, and that limits the kinds of writings that people are going to find acceptable for them to do. I think it should be remembered as incredibly rich, very diverse, and challenging some of our own ideological assumptions. Because these women weren't of a hive mind, some of them were embracing the new culture. They were excited about commerce and translations, and others were much more worried. They saw commerce as creating moral hazards for them, increasing deceit and deception. If in a commercial society, men might be marrying you just for money. So they're incredibly diverse. And yeah, I think we should try and understand them on their own terms and not for the ways they defy us. They might defend the absolute power of kings while also saying that women shouldn't be subject to power of husbands. So I think we should try and embrace those sorts of contradictions and make sense of them in their time and see how the feminism, just as feminism doesn't have one face today, and lots of feminists disagree, even in the 18th century, we have lots of disagreement among these proto-feminists.